Κυρίες και κύριοι, καλησπέρα σας. Σας καλωσορίζουμε. Όσους είστε στη νέα συνεδρία, την απογευματινή, δεν ήσασταν στην πρωινή, αλλά και όσους ήταν στην πρωινή συνεδρίαση, διαδεσιμότητες, κύριοι Δημοτικοί Σύμβουλοι, προσκεκλημένοι, αγαπητοί εισηγητές, σας καλωσορίζουμε όλους. Το λόγο έχει η κυρία Κυπαρίση για να παρουσιάσει τους δύο ομιλητές των δύο εισηγήσεων.
Καλησπέρα και από μένα. Θα καλέσουμε, όπως είναι η σειρά στο πρόγραμμα, την κυρία Μάργριετ Χάγσμα, που με την Σοφία Καραπάνου θα παρουσιάσουν το θέμα Material Expressions of Domestic and Citywide Cults at Castro Calithea and Environs, δηλαδή υλικές εκφράσεις οικιακής και αστικής λατρείας στο Κάστρο Καλιθέας και τα περίχωρα. Δόκτωρ Χάγσμα. Να θυμίσω ότι υπάρχει μετάφραση της περίληψης, της αγγλικής περίληψης στα ελληνικά στη γραμματεία. Μπορείτε όσοι θέλετε να τη ζητήσετε.
Ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ. To begin with, I would like to thank the organizers of the conference very much for their kind invitation and their wonderful philoxenia. We would like to express our gratitude especially to the mayor of Farsala, Mr. Aris Karachalios, who takes a lot of effort in making sure that the world hears about the history and archaeology of this important city. We also warmly thank Mrs. Vaso Nula, who tirelessly promotes this city and its heritage in such an excellent way. Our talk today will focus on domestic and citywide religion in Achaia Theotis. Ancient Greek religion has traditionally been separated in public and domestic religion based on the location of cult practice. The contexts of public worship have overall been well studied, and many sanctuaries and cults in the Aegean have received long-term attention from archaeologists and historians of religion alike. Yet, the region of Thessaly has often been overlooked in this respect, and that is why this conference on Farsalian heritage is so timely. Various scholars have summarized the evidence for Greek domestic-based cults of the classical and Hellenistic periods, and few have incorporated the scarce archaeological evidence. Domestic cult in Greece is most often archaeologically recognized or identified by small portable altars, either placed in niches in mud brick walls, situated in the courtyard sometimes, and sometimes a rectangular hearth is recognized in the courtyard as well, which would be suitable for sacrifice. But overall, of all the houses that have been excavated of this particular period in Greece, not very many houses had these items. The evidence from the International Trade Center Delos, the Hellenistic period, is larger in quantity and more diverse. Statuary, apotropaia, and paintings have been identified as connected to religious life in domestic settings. But based on the finds of excavated houses at Castro Calithea and the cities around it, we will see that Thessalians apparently invested quite intensively in domestic cult, and their cults left behind distinctive traces, be it that they differ distinctly from what we generally find in Greek houses. So I've talked about domestic cult now, but we will also focus in this talk on citywide cult, public cult, so to say. But in our view, this kind of cult is practiced by householders as well. And we will see that in the context of Calithea and environs, that the material expressions of religious cult in the domestic sphere and in the public sphere have a lot of similarities. So our evidence largely derives from the archaeological project at Castro Calithea in Achaia Theotis, a medium-sized urban center which at one point housed approximately 1,000 inhabitants. This is an archaeological project began in 2004 and is carried out by the 15th effort of prehistoric and classical antiquities at Larissa and the University of Alberta in Canada. Castro is named after its visible heavy fortifications and is located near the village of Kallithea. Its ancient name may have been Pevma or Pevmata. The team has recently started with excavations, well, not that recently, it's about 5 years ago, in which the University of Alberta focuses on housing and domestic economy, while the effort's attention is aimed at the study of public spaces and monuments. So here we see an image as a result of our archaeological survey of the site in 3D. And here we have the city map. The defensive structures of this city were likely built in one phase and correlate strongly with an orthogonal, well-organized city plan that we date to the late 4th century, early 3rd century BC, and was inhabited up until very likely the end of the 2nd century BC. This plan was built around an older, almost round acropolis located on the western top of the hill, on this map indicated in green. 2 internal diateichismata are running from the north and south side of this acropolis towards the outer curtain, defensive curtain. They protect the agora, located in the central saddle of the site, and the main housing, and protect also the main housing in its eastern part. The agora consists of an open space surrounded by a number of individual freestanding buildings just north of Avenue E. A narrow street, not in line with the city's grid, crosses the agora in east-west direction and thus separates the northern area from a southern part. And that southern part contains buildings 5 and 6. It's about building 5 that I will talk now. Building 5 is situated in the western part of a rectangular enclosure. It was excavated by the Greek team in 2007 and 2008. The main building, to which the blue arrow points, is divided up in 2 rooms by an internal wall running north-south. In the destruction layer of the anteroom, iron nails from a possibly wooden door were found, and a few sherds, not very many things. The majority of the finds came from the main room, where 15 iron nails, small fragments of clay figurines, and 2 clay themiateria were found. The pottery assemblage contains a large number of fragments of good quality consumption vessels, including a small gloss dish and lampsherds. The figurines and the vases were possibly arranged on wooden shelves at the western wall or on a table in the western central part of the room. In this area were found the nails alongside with traces of fire and pieces of charcoal. 9 coins were found here as well. The destruction of the small temple must have been caused by fire, and the finds in the destruction layer can be dated to the late 3rd, early 2nd century BC, based on the ceramics, while the coins seem to post-date the pottery. The assemblage of finds is rather typical of a sanctuary of this kind, but the fragmentary condition of the clay figurines does unfortunately not allow the identification of the worshipped deity. But one object found exactly in the front of the entrance of this small building deserves a closer look. An orthogonal marble block with 3 round protrusions. It was lying just 50 centimeters east of the entrance, in between the building and the altar, and seemed to have toppled over. What was this? Was this an entrance marker? Was this originally enclosed in the eastern wall of the building, perhaps? Closer scrutiny of a find like this can perhaps shed light on the identification of the sanctuary and we will discuss the significance of these kinds of blocks below, now actually, because they are found elsewhere on the site as well. Here we have a slide of the reconstruction of that small building, and perhaps you have visited the exhibition next door where the reconstruction is actually printed out in 3D as a model. Located in the eastern part of the site, we find Building 10, a presumed domestic structure that the University of Alberta has been excavating for the last 5 years. It's located at the corner of Avenue B in Street 3, and its external measurements are about 20 by 15 meters. Building 10 is a freestanding dwelling which could be entered from an alley running south from Avenue B in its eastern side. We identify this structure as a house with a plan that is characterized by an originally open area surrounded by a variety of covered spaces. In the plan, we can recognize the storage area, and I don't have a pointer here, but perhaps in the southeast corner you see the room with all those round depressions. Those are pitharia, so this is identifiable as the storage room. That's where it is also. There's also a possible area for public dining, a bathroom, and a larger living area with a hearth in the center, and that is the room in the northwest corner. This, in the center, is an avli, a courtyard, with a basin in it, thus sort of creating an atrium or an atrium, a very Roman feature in this otherwise in plan very Greek house. We found blocks with protrusions in various areas of this house. In the northwestern section of the atrium, of the avli, we found a limestone block with 3 protrusions, very similar to the one found in Building 5. The block was, however, much larger. It was found east of the entrance of the living room with hearth, amongst rubble from a wall collapse, and again was toppled over as if it had originally been resting on some kind of support. The finds in this area consisted of pieces of domestic ceramics and roof tiles, nothing that could be clearly connected or associated with this find. 2 blocks, each with 1 protrusion, were found in the entrance to Unit A, where the arrow points. There you can see 2 blocks standing straight, each with 1 protrusion on top. 1 block was made out of limestone and another of marble. Lots of pieces of scattered pottery were found on the floor level near the stones, but again, nothing clearly associated with them. And then 1 more block was found with 1 protrusion on top of a small fireplace in room 8 this past summer. We just excavated that a couple of months ago. It too was toppled over and seemed to have no clear association with the fireplace or the finds found in this room. On the next slide, this is a summary of all these kind of blocks that we found at Kalithea. And looking back to our survey, which we performed in 2004 and 2005, we actually recognized another area where we have found these protrusions. Higher up on the hill, we found a piece of bedrock or perhaps a slab with 2 protrusions, and that's the picture that you see here on the left-hand side, which we originally did not recognize. I recognized it at first as an unfinished stela, but we now think it's something else. There are factors in play which suggest that these items were deliberately set up in this house. As these stones are found in a variety of contexts in the area, and many of them domestic. We move to Farsala. where these stones are found in houses as well as sanctuaries. One rescue excavation at Farsala in the Tsumani plot yielded a stone with one protrusion, and it was standing in situ, so in position. It had not toppled over. It was resting against the northern wall of a courtyard of a domestic structure of Hellenistic date. In the southern part of this courtyard, an apothetis was found, a circular pit lined with stones. In the interior, the base of a stele and many clay figurines were found, which were intact and broken, together with a few shirts and iron nails, with thin pieces of bronze, a lead curved object, animal bones, and charcoal pieces. The figurines consist of reclining women with Apollos, and they date to the 5th, 6th century BC. This type of figurines is known from the apothetis of a sanctuary of Demeter excavated on the Acropolis of Farsala. Their presence in an in-date, much later domestic context suggests that they were considered heirlooms, and this is from the report written by Yorgos Toufeksis. Another block with one protrusion, not in situ, was found in a Hellenistic building at Farsala by Sofia Karapanu during a rescue excavation. This block was found in a room with 2 small marble statuettes of Aphrodite, various terracotta figurines depicting Enodia, and other figurines as well. Various similar blocks with 1 to 5 protrusions are known from Farsala, but they were found out of context. Athanasios Tsavalias reports one such stone in the collection of the 15th Efrat at Farsala with an inscription on its side. As we can see here, Alpatra Anethike. Alpatra dedicated this, which may indicate that these stones, or whatever they represent, were seen as votives to a deity. A stone with 2 protrusions was also found in the exterior narthex of the previous Catholicon of monastery Andinitsa, close to the ancient cities of Ekara and Thaumakoi, which was destroyed in World War II. 2 French historians, Do and de la Coste-Meselière, believe that the monastery was built on the site of an ancient sanctuary, possibly dedicated to Asclepius or Hygieia, as a statuette of this divinity, which is now in the Lamia Museum, was reportedly seen by Friedrich Stehlin close to the monastery. Of the 9 stelae found outside of the southern city wall of Theotic Thebes in 1977, 2 displayed the half-round protrusions similar to the ones found at Kalithea and Farsala. The 2 stelae in question seemed each to have served as a pedestal for 3 half-round protrusions on a rectangular base. They were made from the local tuffo stone found in Theotic Thebes. One describes the dedication of Aristocleia, daughter of Mykina, to Enodia. The other was a dedication to Artemis. The question remains as to what purpose these stones served and how they were set up. It seems that the stones found in Kalithea and the one found in situ in the Tsumani plot at Farsala were clearly meant to stand straight with their protrusions on top. This is confirmed by the positions of the protrusions on the stelae of Theotic Thebes. The inscription found on the side of the stone of the 3 protrusions at Farsala needs to be read with the protrusions on top as well. As such, the evidence is strong that this was their original position. However, recently, one of such stones has been found at Petroporo, the site of ancient Pellina in western Thessaly. Athanasios Tsavalias and Darmezin report a stele with 3 protrusions with an inscription on its side which reads Patholaos Anethike Dikeos. The inscription is certainly meant to be read in a way in which the stone is standing up in a vertical position. This stone is also much thinner than the ones we found, and as such, it is more like a stele than a block. But there are other indications that the stones in Kalithea and environs were set up differently, as they're not only found in portable form, but also, just as the one Kalithea, which I shown you earlier, carved out of the natural rock at various locations. In Farsala, they are found in the areas of the sanctuaries identified as dedicated to Zeus Thaulios and Asclepios. The sanctuary to Zeus Thaulios must have existed on the hill just above the Apidanos spring, where now the Aya Paraskevi church is located. And Arvanitopoulos reports having seen many round protrusions hewn out of the bedrock. He also saw them in the vicinity of the Ios Nikolaos church on the eastern part of town. On the hill east of this church, to the north side of the road to Dilofo, came an inscription describing a certain Chorelos making a dedication to Asclepius, suggesting that the protrusions may be connected to a sanctuary dedicated to said deity. On this hill, we found a number of slots for stelae carved out of the bedrock, some of which were associated with one or more protrusions. In one spot, 3 slots were found with in front of them a row of at least 10 small round protrusions. In another area, we found a square block carved out of the rock with one protrusion on top, but no slots associated with it. This block strongly reminisces the single protrusion ones found in Kalithea. Similar rock-cut protrusions are found at the rocky outcrop on the eastern side of the fortified hill at Theotic Eretria, outside of the city walls. North of this outcrop, walls and foundations are visible of 2 buildings which Irene Blum, who studied this site back in the 1980s, interprets as the remains of a sanctuary dedicated to Apollo. The main building measures 7 by 21 meter and likely represents the temple. On and near this outcrop, Blum identifies about 30 locations with protrusions carved out of the bedrock. The protrusions are often accompanied with a slot, likely for a stele, and their number of protrusions varies from 1 to 4. Some of the protrusions were just at the location of the presumed Asclepios sanctuary at Farsala, situated on a low square pedestal. And here we see that one on the right slide. There is some discussion as to what these objects may represent, but if we summarize our major observations, we can exclude some of the previously suggested interpretations. The stones or the protrusions seem to represent votives. They are mostly meant to stand up, straight, with the protrusions pointing upward. They come in portable form and are carved out of the bedrock. The number of protrusions varies from 1 to at least 10. They are found in domestic contexts as well as public sanctuaries and are associated with Artemis, Enodia, Asclepios, Apollo, Aphrodite, perhaps Demeter. They are sometimes accompanied by a stele or are part of one. Some of the portable blocks with protrusions may be reminiscent of marble weights, as found at Knidos, Corinth, Delos, and Delphi. They often come as representing 2 protrusions, which sometimes are interpreted as breasts. However, these objects are much smaller in size than the stones under discussion. And as many of our specimens are carved out in the bedrock, the interpretation of as weights can be discarded. Arvanitopoulos and Do and de la Cosme-Zellière suggest that these features resemble breasts. Votive breasts are not uncommon in ancient Greece. They are found in sanctuaries dedicated to Asclepios, Artemis, Zeus, Elatea, Cora, and the nymphs, and are often represented as a marble relief with 1 or 2 breasts accompanied with an inscription. It is clear that many of these reliefs were meant to be applied to a wall in vertical position. The position of our stones with protrusions, together with their size and strongly diverging number, leads us to exclude an interpretation as votive breasts. Irene Blum suggests that the protrusions could be interpreted as omphaloi, but the very core, the meaning of omphalos, is that it's associated with a central place, which is, by definition, singular. The word omphalos, however, is associated with a particular type of ritual food, namely with sacrificial cakes, in which omphalos refers to the number of buttons on top of these cakes. Sacrificial cakes in ancient Greece come in many forms and with many names. The interpretation of the protrusions on the stones and bedrock in Achaia, Phthiotis environments as sacrificial cakes comes from Pavlos Chrysostomou, Jean-Claude Decour, followed by Tsavalias and Darmezin, who suggest they may represent Popana or Pelani. In literature and epigraphic evidence, the Popanon is mostly mentioned. This dome-shaped cake was used in sacrifices in a multitude of ritual settings, aside to other forms of bloodless sacrifice. They seem to have been especially important in the cult of Asclepius. Popana were to be consecrated on a bomos and possibly burned together with pelanos, possibly a mixture of flour, honey and oil. But they were first laid out on a trapeza, a table where all that was to be offered was displayed. We have some evidence of what popana must have looked like and how they were displayed from two reliefs, one found in Pella and the other from the Asclepieion in Athens. The stele from Athens shows an altar like a structure with all kinds of fruits and cakes on them, likely a display before sacrifice. The relief from Pella, which is a funerary stele, shows a woman carrying a platter of round cakes, possibly to be eaten at a funerary meal. Popana are mentioned in epigraphic evidence as well. Especially revealing is this inscription, a sacred law inscribed on a marble stele found near the Asclepieion in Piraeus, which prescribes the appropriate number of popana to be offered to a variety of deities associated with Asclepius. The number most often amounts to 3, which is telling, since quite a number of our stones have indeed 3 protrusions. Even more informative for us is the last part of this inscription, which mentions that Euthydemus, a priest of Asclepius from Eleusis, will set up a stele next to the altar. Many scholars interpret the text as such that he intends to depict the very cakes which were to be offered on them. The sacrifice was to serve as a so-called prothuos, sometimes translated as a preliminary bloodless sacrifice prior to incubation or to the real thing, the blood sacrifice. Why were such laws necessary? Literary sources seem to mock the sometimes very elaborate and confusing instructions regarding the number and forms of cakes in a bloodless sacrifice, and epigraphical ones confirm the detailed instructions. For instance, a Lex Sacra from Pergamon instructs to sacrifice a ribbed round cake with 9 omphaloi to Zeus Apotropaios and to Zeus Melikios, and a normal round cake with 9 buttons, each to Artemis, and then the epithet has gone lost, Artemis Prothyraia and Ge, before the sacrifice to Asclepius. The right kind of flour should be used in the right quantities in preparing the cakes. To perform the right kind of sacrifice at the right kind of occasion seems to have been quite an obsession for priests as well as worshippers of the sanctuary. To set up reminders such as these visible regulations set in stone must have made it at least a bit easier for everybody to use the right kind of cakes, the right form of cakes, the right number of cakes, and the right number of omphaloi. Emily Kearns interprets the fact that the cakes themselves would be depicted on the stele from Piraeus as a prescriptive one. If the cakes do not match the image on the stele, the sacrifice could be rejected, and she deplores that the stele is broken off and that the image of the cakes is no longer there. But we have another idea. The interpretation of von Eichstätt and Kearns